today we're going to hear something about the logging camps, and Dennis Sain is going to give us some insight into what happened at the logging camps and his days on the river. So we'll start with Dennis.
Well, the days everybody wanted to work at Bonner at one time or another, it seemed like, and I got on in the mill, and I can't remember the date. It was, I believe it was March 1960. I worked in the sawmill for picking edgings for about 2 weeks, and the guy that was running the trips, and people who don't understand what the trips were, below the edging table, and before they went to the trimmer, there was a set of transfers that when they run timbers through the edger, they had to go to the tramway department. You would have to pick them up off the edger table and transfer them over to another drive, and then wood that was going to the trimmer had to be tripped off onto the deck to go down to the trim saws. So, and I worked that for about 2 weeks, and the guy that was doing it, he'd gone on the river as feeding the debarker slip, and I'd go down during my breaks and I would visit with him, and he didn't like sitting out there in the cold at night on that debarker slip with that upriver wind blowing on you. So he wanted to go back to the trips, and we talked with Bob Clubb and Ernie Karkinen, and they said, sure, you guys could switch. So I fed debarker slip for maybe a month, and Eddie Schwab, who was a breakdown man on nights, he decided he wanted to go day shift on the river. So I got a chance to go out on the river, and the first couple of nights, no cork boots, and I'm trying to walk logs like the rest of them. I learned how to swim in the river. And by Friday that first week, Friday night, I got my paycheck and went to Westerners and bought a brand new pair of Buffalo cork boots. Those are the ones that are sitting on the table. I still have them. And being the youngest man on the river and the most gullible, I guess, Gail Nelson and Bob Handley, they were the other two men on the river. They said, well, why don't you go out and try and help them unload log cars there before it gets dark? Well, I got to go to the head end of the river, and they stayed down the lower end, so I got all the grunt work. It was an experience, but I enjoyed it. I thought, hey, that was fun. I learned how to walk the logs, and I was having trouble with that. I'd come out during day shift, and I would sit on the bank, watch old Bill Roberts work the river. He was a man. You could throw a box of toothpicks out there, and I think he could walk across the river on them. He was good. So I learned a lot of tricks just watching him, how you get on the little logs. If you duck walked on them, turned your feet at an angle, you could get 1 foot on 2 logs and the other foot on 2 logs, and you could stay afloat. If you stayed on one log, you went swimming, and it was quite an experience. OSHA now would definitely put that to a screeching halt. No life jackets, and we unloaded the log cars. That was a real experience. A railroad jammer. You were between a railroad jammer and a log car. You hooked that crotch line to the deck, and the jammer operator would pull that line up tight, and the two of you'd reach big pokers, reach through and trip them locks and unlock them stakes, and then he would raise up and the logs would go tumbling off, and you run like hell either direction, get out of the way. And then afterwards I would have to be in breakdown. I'd have to go, when they're on the bank on what they call the high landing, you had to roll them into the river, and times when they unload the chain that they had holding the stakes together for top loading, that would come unlocked. Well, then you'd lose a stake down the river, so you'd have to run a tong line down there and pull the stake back up to put on the log car. And when they dumped off the wall into the pond off the mill wall, sometimes the logs just stood on end. You had to get the railroad jammer to come and pull them loose, and then they would pile 3 or 4 deep. We learned a good secret there. If it got too late in the night, we leave the jackpots for day shift. And at night, you would about 10 o'clock each night, the wind would change and start blowing upriver. So then you were fighting all night to keep pushing logs downriver, and we had to had a cable that went across from the small log mill clear across to the cliff on the other side, and we hung ropes from that. We had these big dogs, looked like an axe kind of with a pointy end, and we'd, at night when the wind was blowing too much, we'd get logs pushed down the debarker slip, then we'd walk out on the logs and pound these in to keep the logs from blowing up river so we could bring some more down till we could pull the dogs. And at night, then we would drive the dogs in before we'd go home, and that way there was logs at the debarker slip for the day shift to start. And there was a battle, usual battle between day shift and night shift, of course, but it was overall a fun time. And then I got married, so night shift was out. I got a chance to go in the mill on day shift, and worked on the tramway for just about a year. Rick over here, we worked together or against each other on the tramway occasionally. And then I got a chance to go to the woods in May of 1962, and there I was a choker setter up in Dirty Ike. Now, that first time going into Dirty Ike, riding with some of these cat skinners that are used to 70%, I wasn't. It was a scary situation at night, or at daytime, coming down in Dirty Ike there.
What is Dirty Ike?
It's the creek just before you get to Clinton.
Oh, okay.
If you ever drive up there, it is steep. We had one cat skinner one cat was down, another cat skinner, Don Montelius, was running a skid cat, and Huey Evans' cat was broke down, and Huey was walking down ahead of him to guide him down the mountain, and Don couldn't wait, and Huey come back, tell him you can't get down. So the cat stayed there overnight till the next day. They went and got the brush lines, which is about 400 feet of winch line. They tied another cat on him and led him over the cliff so he could get down and out. So, like the old saying, it's a lot of fun, and you get half near killed every day. So it was quite an experience, and after I set chokers for about a month, we in Dirty Ike and Kendall Creek. Then they put me slinging tongs the rest of the summer, and that was another real quick experience. Slung tongs for Jimmy Nelson, and then they put the 22B on rubber on right away, and then Bob Paddock was running the 22B on rubber, and until he dropped the heel boom on me, and then I was off for a couple of weeks. But I was dumb enough, I come back to work right away. So it's been a real neat experience. I will say Anaconda, everybody badmouthed Anaconda, I badmouthed. I eventually became a shop steward and a plant committee man and everything, but I look back on it, Anaconda was one hell of a good company to work for. I mean, their logging practices beat anything that you see today. I mean, when I first went in the woods, they fired some of their cat skinners for knocking over leaf trees. And there was one cat skinner, his name's Frank, I can't remember, it was a big issue of him tipping over a bunch of leaf trees, and they fired him, and the union fought it for quite a while, but
Frank Hill.
Frank Hill, that's right. You learned when you were running cat to be a little more careful, and then they started the clear cuts, but Anaconda's clear cuts were nothing like you see today. It was quite an experience, and that's about all I can think of right at the moment. Go ahead.
You're bringing stagecoach pictures.
I don't have them. I wished I could find them. We have, my family used to own the old Bearmouth school bus stagecoach, and the family sold it, and we had some pictures and they have disappeared. I've just got some partial pictures, but they don't show anything of what the stagecoach looks like. It was nothing like the ones you see on TV. It was a big touring coach, had a door in the right-hand front corner, and had bench seats along the sides, and had a door in the very back that you could get in had a metal cover over the back step, so the dust and mud didn't get on the step if you got in the back door. The family had it for a lot of years. We used it in a few parades in Missoula, but nobody seemed to be able to find pictures of it, so. Any other questions?
Talk about some of the things you brought in over.
Okay, well, I got over here, I was working for JTL when Bonner was on strike and they were rebuilding the log yard. And I had found the head of a pike pole. And this was a river pike pole because you can tell by the screw end on it. So when we're out on the logs, if you, they had to have the mill pike poles were short. This end had to be long, so when you dropped it on a log, it sunk through the bark. And the screw end, if you had a log that you wanted to bring, you would give it a twist when you threw it, and it would kind of screw in the end of the log so you could pull the log to you, and then give it a twist and get it off the log. And this is just a kind of a reproduction I made. My pike poles on the river were between 16 and 18 feet long, because you had to reach out there. I mean, some of these jackpots, it was not a lot of fun. You like pickup sticks. You played with them till you got them out. And then the PV, you always, when we're through a shift each night, they had a rack underneath the sawmill on the west side that everybody on the river had a place to hang their pike pole to keep it straight and dry. You just didn't lean it up, because a 16, 18-foot pole would take a set, and you did not want crooked poles out there. So you had a rack that you would hang. Everybody had his own rack in the mill. Everybody had his own pole. You didn't borrow somebody's pole unless you happened to break one. But everybody had their own pole. They kept it as sharp as they wanted. And some people didn't know what a PV looked like. This was what we used a lot on breakdown, the PVs. And this one, I've kind of beat it in the dirt a bit. We kept the points a little sharper so we could stab logs with it as well. But this we used for turning the logs. And undoing the jackpots, you climb up there. Some of these logs would be 3, 4, and 5 deep piled in the river, and then you'd have to break them all down to single layer. So you get out there and you watched what you did, because if you turned the wrong log, you went swimming. And we had at the, huh?
How many times did you?
I lost count. After the first week, I know about 4 or 5 times the first week. But in the main pond, it was heated. So in the winter, a swim in the wintertime wasn't that bad. It was getting out. And that long walk, so we had the donkey shack down at the end of the pond where everybody in the river had a locker. And you put your dry clothes in there, and so if you went swimming, then you'd slosh down, change into dry clothes, and come back and work the rest of the night. My cousin, he came on the river, and he kind of competitive. Anything I could do, he could do. So we got on the river out there. If we had a bad situation, we'd talk Jack into going out and do it, so we'd watch him swim. His first night on the river, he went in 3 times. He used up my dry clothes, and Norbert Fifield was on the lower end of the river. He used up Fifield's dry clothes, and about 2 o'clock I fell in. So I had to work the rest of the night in wet clothes. So.
And what time of the year was this?
When my cousin, it was late April when he come in, so it was still cold at night.
Yeah.
Summertime, it wasn't too bad when you fell in. You could work all night in wet clothes if you wanted. It'd get cold go off shift at 3 o'clock. It would get a little bit cold, but it wasn't that bad. It was quite an experience. I'm glad I did it. It was. I wouldn't change it for what I've done anything else. I was in the best physical shape in my life then. I mean, being breakdown, we had a lot of logs, 3 and 4 foot in diameter, and getting them 2 and 3 deep, getting them unpiled was quite a pull. I mean, they had a little crook in them. They did not want to roll. You had to fight them at times.
You use a snipe on those to make it longer where you can pull harder.
No, you tried to find one that you liked real well. Some of these fit your hand better. Some of them, the handle got a little bit crooked. And anything you did, preferably go swimming before you lose your peavy if you could. But they shut down the mill in August for vacation, then we would clean the pond. And when they drained that pond, you would see a forest of these standing up because they go down. This is the way they'd stand in the bottom of their pond. So once the pond was, see the sunken logs and the peavy forest standing out there, we go out and salvage all the peavies. And a lot of guys had their initials carved in them, so we'd set them aside and get them dried out. And then we would skid out all the sunken logs. And then something now that the EPA and OSHA and everybody we had a huge bucket, probably 12 foot wide, and they'd set the railroad jammer up on the wall and bring the old D8 out on the dike wall. My first experience of running a cat, I had to drive that old 2U8 out on that wall, and the wall was about 10 foot wide and the D8 was 9 foot wide. And that wall shook as you walked that 8 out there. It had to set out, and you had a tail holder line that you would hook, and they had the line run all the way. It had that D7 they used to raise and lower the gates on the dam, and with a double drum winch, hook that bucket up between the D7 and the railroad jammer. We'd pull that up down the pond, drop it in, and then the D8 on the wall would guide where that bucket went in the pond, and we'd scoop all of that mud and silt to the bottom of the pond, and guys would stand down at the outlet of the pond with a fire hose and wash all the mud down the river.
Did you get 2 and 3 guys on some of the bigger logs?
Oh yeah, there were times we'd have to use 2 of us at least to get some of them rolled, and the hydraulic debarker would only take a 5 foot diameter log. And there were a couple of times before we really realized that, we got some logs that were over 5 foot, and we fed them in small end first, going up the slip. They got in the debarker and then get stuck. Had a big wall, steel wall in there that the logs had to go through. So when it got stuck in there, and the debarker operator had a TV camera so he could see what was happening in the debarker. And if he wasn't watching that debarker could cut a log in half if something got off the track or something in there. And when we jam a log in, then they would have to shut the debarker down, bring the millwrights out, break that chain because there was no reverse on the debarker. It would just, so we'd have to break that chain, tie the railroad jammer on, pull the log out backwards, slab off a piece, put the chain back together, and run it through there. And if a log had too big a crook or sweep in it, we had a chainsaw, electric chainsaw out on the boom with Mark's little metal pins out there for lengths that we'd pull these crooked logs up. That means you'd have to take everything out of the way because you had to turn this log sideways, pull up to the boom and cut the log into, get the sweep, because it went up that debarker chute wrong and roll over, then it would come off on the catwalk. And a couple of them would come off and come right back down to where the guy feeding the debarker slip would be sitting. So crooked logs, that was a no-no. You had to. And a couple of times when they were running all mixed species, originally they dumped the logs in as they came off the railroad car. The logs went through the sawmill, pine, fir, larch, spruce, cedar, whatever. That's why the 400-foot green chain, because they could sort all species on the green chain at that time. And the debarker operator on nights would fill the lower pond and break logs. He'd just keep running and running. So Gail Nelson and Bob Hanley one night, we had some cedar there. They took the sharp end of the pike pole and dropped it on the cedar and pulled it down, stripped that bark, so when it went up in the debarker, it didn't peel off its bark shred, it peeled off its big long strings, then plugged up the chute, so they had to shut the debarker down for an hour.
They really liked you guys.
And one night, he'd filled the lower, when they changed the species, it filled the lower pond with pine, and Fifield finally went up and stopped him, that they were breaking the pine logs in the pond, in the lower pond. And we thought, well, Tabish, he will start it up anyway. the last half hour, no matter if it breaks logs or not, and we all went in the river shack. So it had a little heater in there, and we're keeping warm. And about 3:30, the mill shift was ended at 3 o'clock. 3:30, we woke up. He never started the debarker again. We come out through the gate, and Bob Clubb was still at the main gate, and he went, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "Oh, we just worked on our pike poles tonight." So, any more questions?
Did high water affect the pond at all?
Not after they closed it. Once had the open river, the pond would go up and down more. But once they closed in 1960, when they filled in the end of the pond, see, they got all the gravel for filling in the end of the pond right there by Marco Flats campground, by Blue Slide. You see that big gravel pit before you get to Blue Slide? That all went in the river down here to fill the end of the pond when they got the Wagner. Because when they got the Wagner, unloading log cars changed, because all the log cars, the old log cars, they had a chain on top for top loading. They would load up so high, and they would string the chain across, and they had a special loopy type hook that the top loaders would get on and hook these chains on. Then they would load on top of them chains. It would keep the log bunks from coming apart and from logs from falling off as much. So Wagner had to come in and take the top part off of the load, and then they would undo the chains, and that's when they changed to the steel bunks on the log cars after that. The wooden bunk log cars disappeared shortly after 1960. Any other question?
They did flood that pond in June of '64 when they had that high water. They had a lot of problems out there that year.
Well, at that time I was up trying to save McNamara Road.
They did have that one time, I remember.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your project on McNamara Road?
Which project on McNamara?
Putting the road.
Well, when I went there, the road was, they had built part of it before I went in the woods, and I was slinging tongs, and we picked up the right-of-way. They had built the road, the original grade going up McNamara, what we call Hill 29 now. There was another grade above that. As they started to build what they call Hill 29, they were dozing out. Freddie Gunsler was running a dozer, and he pushed out over there where you can look straight in the river, and it gave out from underneath him, and that 21 almost went in the river. So they backed off and quit building it, and they built the spur up over the top. And then the next summer, Henry Prost come back, and they built from the other direction going down, and did the drilling and blasting, and put that in. And at the end, they built the road up to where they wanted to put the bridge in. And that's where old man Whitaker's camp, when he used to hike in to hunt up there, he had a camper. We built a road right through his camp. He had a little lean-to built there, and his pots and pans, and I have one of the pot lids. And then when I was grading the road in there, the McNamara's Landing, where the McNamara's Landing camp was, we built the road right through there. I tried to save where the log dump was. They said grade all that off, but I left a berm where the log dump used to be, and where the ash pit was. I saved. And as I graded that road for years, they had a double track there at McNamara, went from where the camp was all the way back to the cliff. And as I graded there, I would gather up the railroad spikes and railroad car parts. There was I had a big pile of brake shoes piled up there along the road. People have hauled them off over the years. And I took the BLM up there afterwards and showed them this camp. I told them I used to stack these brake shoes up, and one of the BLM guys says, I wished I had one of them. And the BLM archaeologist says, well, this is BLM land. That's a $20,000 fine for hauling off artifacts. So I told him, I says, I'll tell you what, I will give you a pre-BLM brake shoe. Didn't set too well with them, but I picked it up years ago. And other than that, I don't know. Any more questions?
Could you talk a little bit about these maps?
Well, I got some old maps there that the company were going to scrap out, and that shows Camp 8 and Camp 6 and Blanchard and Chamberlain Creek. And I have some other, I have one map there, but it shows the railroad grade that was never built. But that map is about 6-7 foot long. It goes by mile. It's the Montour Railroad grade. It's the one that eventually Anaconda built, the Rosignol built the road up at Ovando. All of that road, the main road that goes up around Doney Lake and clear to the North Fork, that was all going to be railroad grade. And that one map has got that all mile by mile, how much it was going to cost to build the railroad grade mile by mile. It's got the profile and everything on that. It takes a lot. And I have the one map rolled up there is the coal dock from Woodworth, the plans for the coal dock at Woodworth, which was a pretty good size. And the whiskey barrel lid, I found that up Kramer Creek. We're going to build road. I knew I'd hunted up there, and I knew that camp was there. It's from the 1880s, the Northern Pacific Railroad camp. And the company, we were going to build road through there, and I took my wife and some friends up, and that was laying on they had a wood sidewalk at that camp. And that was laying face down on that sidewalk, and a whiskey barrel lid, and I turned it over, and I see the brand on it. So I brought that home, and about the next week, we did get the doorknobs off the camp. We got the porcelain doorknobs at home as well. About a week later, Bob Grenfell went through there dozing and build road and dozed that camp up in a heap, and they burned it up. What?
Where was that up Kramer Creek?
Oh, man, that's a long time ago. Past the East Fork, way past the East Fork, up. There used to be you see the footings for an old sawmill in the bottom of the canyon there in Kramer Creek, above the mine. They had the sawmill built over the creek at that, because the footings for the sawmill were sticking up out of the water there for years. There used to be a little logging trail went up, and I would say we're about 8-9 miles up Kramer Creek, and it was way up on top of the mountain up there. It would have been burned up now because it was in part of that Ryan Gulch fire anyway.
How far up Blackfoot did the railroad go?
It went all the way to what they called almost the Scotty Brown Bridge turnoff. There was a landing there they called Rosignol's Landing. That was end of tracks. Before they built the new highway, they used to have the landing out in the flat out there. And if you look in the springtime, you can still see the railroad grade goes out that flat where they have a gravel pit out there. But then when they built the new highway, they moved the railroad over against the hill, and that was Rosignol hauled all the logs out of Ovando and all that country down the old Milwaukee Railroad grade to Rosignol's Landing. And they had a Y at one time by Cottonwood Creek where the railroad went up to Woodworth. You can still see that from the highway. The Y is right below the highway. And they had a huge stockyard. They shipped a lot of cattle in and out of Blackfoot Valley up there by the Sperry House. There was just below, there was a railroad spur set there, and they loaded cattle there. And then just below that, the railroad crossed the river and went over to Chamberlain. Anything else?
Well, that was really interesting.
I could
Thank
go
you.
on for hours.
And I should tell you that yesterday was Dennis's birthday, and his wife made a cake, and it's in the back, and they went.
21.
Our next speaker today is Leroy Kristofferson, who's going to get the logs from the woods to the mill, and he asked me to tell you that he said his hands cut the last national Christmas tree, so that's.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
Well, this has been absolutely a journey since the last time I was here a month ago. And I brought this picture along because I'm sure that people in this audience are related to these drivers. The day that Art Cook sold this company, his company, Anaconda Forest Products, I can name the drivers that were on these trucks. And I'm going to have somebody help me write the names down as I read them to somebody, but we'll have that on the table at the end of today. What I want to say is, listening to Dennis, and cat skinners would get fired for pushing over leaf trees. Let me tell you how it goes today. Today, when we line skid 2,000 feet uphill, they designate wildlife trees. And it probably costs us $250 to move the line machine so we don't skin up the leaf trees, the wildlife trees, or the seed trees. As soon as we finish an area, it can be a big or small area depending on, they go in and cut the wildlife trees down after we protect them.
Oh, my God.
Okay? Then sometimes we have to go back and skid the wildlife tree up, and then another person will come along and we'll send that wildlife tree back down in the woods for the ants.
Oh, good grief.
Honest to God, that happens. I want to share the old person bus. I don't think that's the right name for it, Dennis. When they took the crews to the woods behind the train, there was a maintenance car and then a club car and something else. Well, one of those cars now we have found, and it's been given to the Historic Society out of Fort Missoula, and it sits out there behind Rocky Mountain junk place where they dismantle a lot of stuff. Well, there's a car there now that we can have if we can get it out to the fort. It's just sitting there. It's four-sided. It has its wheels, but we can have that. Will somebody in this audience help me find a set of pig's feet? Who here knows what they were? Pig's feet. The pig's feet go on the end of a crotch line. Who knows what a crotch line is?
Dennis does.
Dennis does.
He said that word.
Do we have any around?
I don't know, Dennis.
Put it on anybody. Listen for it. All your antique shops, wherever you go or walk or whatever, I need a set of pig's feet and a set of bell hooks. And they are the two things that go on the ends of crotch lines. Do you have any? Do you have some?
I have some, but I don't know if I can find them all.
Will you please? And share it with us here. And I need a fantail. Any fantails around? They're out there. We got to find them. And the reason I'm saying these names is because I want to be part of this book when it's written. I want to do the glossary thing because there's logging terms and names in there that if you haven't been around or kicked around or sat on it, you might not know what it is. So I've offered my... What's that?
Did you advertise the paper for it?
I'm already on the antique logging equipment internet. I've got several people looking for them, but they're a little scarce. But I know they're out there. In northern Idaho, Priest River, I'm from Naples, Idaho, so it's still a little bit behind time. I might find some in an old blacksmith shop if I ever get over there to do it. I'm scared to drive through Libby because I might get that other stuff on me. Which I won't go into that, that's too political, but I probably have what they have up there because I hauled logs down the Fisher River for so many years that the dust probably got to me too. So those are the things, and sharing with Dennis here in the last month and searching a gentleman you might know too, Don Skillicorn. Today's his 90th birthday, or he'd be here. He's got his family home with him today. Is that right, Dennis? Yep. Yeah, he's 90 today, and I offered to go up and get him and bring him down, but he had his day planned, so I couldn't do that. So things have changed. It's been exciting to do this, and if somebody else sit down with me, we'll write up the drivers' names here. As for, there's 18 trucks when Art Cook sold. There were 16 assigned drivers that day, is that right, Jard?
Yeah.
You took this picture, right? You took this picture? Okay. I don't know who took this, but Art gave it to us when he gave the trucks to Anaconda Forest Products that year.
Could you throw out some of the names?
Yeah, I know them all. I finally figured them all out. Shall I go through them?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I went to work for Art Cook. W.A. Cook, William Art Cook. And I was in forestry school down here. I have a degree in forestry and hauled logs all my life, so it doesn't make any difference. The newest truck was driven by Billy Tagg.
Right there.
Billy, is that right? What year did Art sell these?
I think it was in 67,
6?
67, I think it was.
Who drove 44, Billy?
Driving them Chuck Hart,
Who drove 43? You're right on so far.
Bob Cochran.
42,
I don't remember that.
James Dykes.
Yep, that's right.
41,
Little guy.
Dave Normando. 40,
Roger Smith,
Roger Smith. 39,
Elmer Wall,
38,
the other Wall.
Roy. 37. This is great, folks.
Yeah.
Ray Stritt. 36. Ron Bailey. 35. Keith Lurbeck.
Yeah, he was.
34. I was on 34. 33. Louis Stemple. 32. Everett Smith. 31. Ray Michelle. 30 was an auto car, and Art got rid of it to buy your new truck. Okay? Is that right, Bill? Right, these are all Peterbilts.
That was the second auto car we had.
Yeah, the first one didn't last either, did it?
25.
25 was.
It was an off-road truck. Too heavy.
Did Art ever tell you that the first set of duals wouldn't make the corner? The first set of two bogies wouldn't make the corner because they were too stiff? Did Art ever tell you that? They made it, didn't they? They made it a lot of times. We're down to 27 and 28, or 27 and 28, because 29 was autocar, and there were no permanent drivers. However, Ray Froelich, Snooze Chew and Ray Froelich, and Art's boy Jerry were the two temporary drivers on the end of the truck.
Charlie Trees.
No, Charlie Treese drove only in the Max, Dennis. No?
Drove 29 for a long time. 29 had no stake extensions. It had them pointy stakes.
29 was the auto car.
No.
No,
30 was the other.
30 was the auto car. Okay, we need to put that in there.
Charlie Treese was 29 until he went running cat.
See, this is great. This is how it comes out of the woods works, but we'll keep working at it. So you find those things, Mr. LeGreed.
There was probably a pretty good chance that it was my old man that took that picture.
It might have been. He's probably sold them all to Art, didn't he?
I've got quite a few pictures just about like that. He
Did-
took a lot of pictures.
Did your dad sell them to Art?
Pardon?
Did your dad sell them to Art?
Did what?
Was your dad the salesman that sold those trucks to Art?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
He dealt with art a lot.
yeah.
But I've got quite a few pictures just about like that. So, but he passed away about 4 years ago. You knew old Leonard.
Oh, I knew Leonard. Leonard sold me my first new one, too. I told you this last month, sir, that your dad, Leonard, put an electric generator in my grandpa's barn in North Dakota. That's a while ago, but it's true. Kim?
What's an auto car?
An auto car is not a Kenworth or a Peterbilt or a GMC or a whatever they have nowadays. It was a make of truck then. It was principally designed as a heavy-duty truck.
Wasn't it auto car Brock?
No, no.
White auto car.
No, it was straight auto car. White came later.
Well, white White and Auto Car they were basically, well, they merged.
Yeah, they merged, but one's built for road and one was built for off-road, like the big ore trucks and stuff, so. That's about all I can tell you. I'm very happy to share with you that there's 4 people in Montana that have cut the national Christmas tree. 20 years ago, it came off of the Fisher River up at Libby, cut by the Chrismores, Bill and Stu Chrismore. And this year, I got to share with the national Christmas tree up Rye Creek with the Forest Service because they wanted a representative from the government. His name was Charlie Miller. And then I got selected to not only haul the tree out of the woods, but to help cut it. And
Wow.
I think that was pretty nice. So if you people will look for those pieces of stuff for me, we'll put them in the Missoula Historic Society out there. Write it down if you can't remember, or give me a call, because we got to find some of them. They're around. Fantail, crotch line, bell hooks, and pig's feet.
Would Charlie Actopee maybe be able to?
Let me tell you a story about Charlie Actopee, okay? You'll know this one, Dennis, because it happened in Lincoln. You remember his first day of sawing?
No, I don't.
No, you were probably on the grader somewhere, maybe plowing a road out for us. Well,
Not the brush something.
yeah, you could have been. I remember that. But Charlie Actopee wanted to work in the woods. And he'd set tongs for probably Jared Hurst or some of these guys on a single line. And he wanted to go sawing. So Skilly puts him in the crew pickup, or Harold Schmidt puts him in the crew pickup, and off to Lincoln we go. And it's a perfect park. And the trees, 2.5 feet, 3 feet long. And Skilly says, well, start there, Charlie. 2 hours later, it hit the ground. He had a big tree pinched in the saw because he hadn't figured it out yet. That was his first day of sawing. I remember that. Okay. Is that right, Dennis? So I'm very happy to have worked all I've ever done at this place out here at Bonner. Excuse, I might go too crazy here, but I just love hauling logs. I've always had to haul logs somewhere. Ever since I can remember a little boy, I always had to haul something. I developed something to haul something on. So 100 loads a day. I went to work here November 27th, 1967. I seen the old mill go down, the new mills come up, the new mills go down, and now it's ended. But what a terrific journey. Somewhere around 5 million miles.
How many trucks did you own?
The most trucks I ever owned was 44. That was not all in Montana. I was lucky enough to get some authority out of Oregon. And I don't like hauling logs to export. I don't like that. I've done it because that was a requirement. But to have a foreign buyer drive up in his limousine with patent leather shoes on and say to you, you dumb Americans, I never liked that.
I can't imagine why.
So I had a silver fir on one of my trucks, probably about, I'd say, that big. Perfect, just like a pencil. And he says, you do not drop that log. You lay that log down. That's how they'd buy the log. If it wasn't perfect, they didn't want it. You go take it to another yard. That log today, I'll bet you, is underwater out in the ocean. Still there. Those buyers bought the entire Olympic forest, put it out to the ocean, and it's still there. Isn't that sad? Dennis, we don't have anything either. We don't have the old tree planter stuff, do we? Do we have the old cage anywhere? The old tree planting cage?
I don't think so.
Any idea where we might find it? We need that somewhere.
I got these chokers I found.
Yeah. Yeah, you find me a fantail now. There's got to be one of them too.
Well, they went to Pacific when they cleaned out camp. They were in that cable house. They had several old fantails in cable house.
Somebody will uncover one. What's a
The
fantail?
bull hooks that used to use like behind the HD6.
Yeah, we need a big old bullhook too, but there's some of them already out at the next Saturday out at the fort is forestry days for the university, but there's becoming a lot of new stuff in there. The new biomass baler. We're trying to get a falling contest. They have the climbing contest, the chopping contest, and stuff like that. But man wants to know what a fantail is. You do it or I'll do it, Dennis. Explain it. You pulled them more than I have. I can hook them up, but I never pulled them very far because they didn't fit on a log truck.
Well, fantail is like, see, two of them chokers I got back there, they're called what they're button chokers. They got a button on each end, and you would wrap the choker around the log, put the button in the bell, and the other end, they had a big block, it was on the back of the fantail, about this wide, it had about 7 slots. 7 slots in it, and you could stack about 4 chokers per slot, and they had a big round hole, and you'd stuff that knob down through and into the fantail, and that way this would go down in the fantail itself. One would hook onto the button, the choker on the log, and you would stack all these on that fan. That way you would put 8, 10, 12 logs behind a cat. And when they used fantails a lot, they used to use what they called a skidding pan. There used to be one left in Belmont, but it's got scrapped out and gone. A big, about 8-foot wide chunk of steel that...
Like a miner uses to put all their gear on it.
Yeah, and would hooked on the back of the cat, and the cat operator would winch the logs up on this, put the logs in the fantail, and it made it easier to drag them down. And with these button chokers, now this is a small one. This they had on their winch line. This is called a bitch link. This is a little one. The big one...
That's a pair hook.
It's a bitch link.
What's the difference?
Nothing.
Nothing. This is good. This is good.
Like a fiddle.
But this end was tied to the winch line on the cat. This is a little tiny one. But the big ones, like for these old 3/4 chokers, they're much bigger, and then you would slide that button through this, and then you'd winch it up to the cat, where you would take it off the winch line and put it in the fantail.
Well, the well guys use stuff a little like that on the sand lines.
Yes, yeah. And I don't know, that's my explanation.
Okay, this is, what Dennis is talking about is this is a button and a button choker, but you see there's another thing in here. Well, that's a bell hook. Usually the ones that went in fantails didn't have the bell hook. So you could use either end on the fantail.
Also, these here bells, we would just they get these made, they come like this, and then you had to install your own bell.
That's why it's split.
Because they had the slots in them, and you take a hammer, you'd lay this out on the track of the cat, and pound the cable down through these notches. And you had to think about it when you put these on, or you could put this bell on backwards. Which backwards meant when you were hooking the logs up, you always wanted to swing the choker around. You always looked at the bell. You always wanted to hook up to where this was against the log. If you put it on backwards, you get it in, this side would be against the log. When you got to the landing, it's twice as hard to unhook. They're designed to go on the log, so when you got to the landing, you just pop them open. These were the 3/4 chokers. They went to, when I first started, that big babbited 7/8 one was mine cable. When I first went to the woods, they had a few of them left, and they were
40 pounds a foot or something.
Oh yeah, and once you skidded a few, especially if you skidded smaller logs, they kinked up. And you had to be real careful when you unhooked them, because you unhook them and it would come back and smack you in the leg, and it hurt.
Yeah, they hurt.
Big time. So, and it got to where they only kept a few of them around. If you got your cat stuck, you wanted a heavy choker. And then we got rid of them 7/8, went to 3/4. These were the big chokers, and we used 5/8. And then they went to 9/16, and now I think they're half.
Or quarter.
Yeah.
Those were the Duratec buttons, the first ones weren't tapered.
No, that old one back there is,
Yeah, hard to hook.
yes. And one thing we're missing that I would like to have got out of camp was a choker spoon. I haven't seen one of them.
No. Boy, we gotta
It's a
keep
big
looking, we
long-
gotta keep looking.
Probably about this long, had a handle on it, each cat had one. And it was like a shovel, but it was built like a trowel, probably about this wide, and about that long with a little shovel that, when a log was tight on the ground, trying to get these buttons through, you would dig a little hole with a choker spoon, so you could shove your choker underneath the log. And there was some in camp, but then they disappeared. I think they went in that scrap bin.
Keep looking for that stuff and help us out. We're gonna keep digging at this.
That thing that you got laying on the floor, the last time I seen one of them is up in Haines, Alaska. My brother put on the logging show up there. They got all that stuff up there.
Have him send some of that stuff down.
Well, it's pretty heavy stuff, that's pretty expensive.
Did you,
Heavy like what I got.
Yeah, they got all that stuff. My brother there participates in a logging contest up there, and they're putting chokers, things like that, around logs there that is taller than I am. Yeah,
it's amazing stuff.
yeah, that's how
Amazing
big,
stuff up there.
that's how big the trees they were.
Would you folks share with me a minute? I have one of my employees here in the audience with me. I don't think I get him to say something, but I might. Dan, would you please stand up? His name is Dan Risco, and that man drives log truck for me every day that there's a job to go to. And you'll notice, Dan has one arm. What an amazing man, let me tell you. Okay, give him a hand. Thanks for coming, Dan. You didn't expect that. Okay. You will work tomorrow if I find you load? Okay. Well, folks, that's about all I know. We're going to keep digging at some of this stuff, and if you run onto any of that, give me a call or something. I'll go pick it up or wherever I got to go. Sir?
Yeah, a question, or digging this old stuff up. What about the old galloping goose? Does anybody know where that went?
Out of the fort.
It's out in the forest?
It's out, yeah. That's what you're calling the old engine, the galloping goose?
A little, yeah. And I think
Looked like a
I think they repainted the door, picture of it in Bateman's book or someplace.
Yeah, I think it's in Bacon's book, yeah.
Yeah, and we just redid this stack here on front. It was rusting out, and we fixed that, and if you go to the fort next weekend, there's a crotch line set up out there. The crotch line is the two lines off of main line that lifted those logs up on the rail cars. Okay? That's a crotch line. And that's a slide ass out there.
Yeah.
A slide ass is different than a gin pole, and it's different than an A-frame.
Oh, my French.
Kinda, logging French.
It's some kind of a boom to get them up in the air.
Well, walk out there and visit. It's going to be a show. They're going to have the steam sawmill running and all that.
4 blocks from now.
Can you make it?
Wasn't there a McGippert?
Yep.
The old steam McGippert.
Picture of that in Bateman's book.
Who pulled the last load of logs down on a train? Who was the engineer, Dennis? Dan Ryan?
Spooner's father-in-law.
Orville Spooner's father-in-law.
Orville Spooner was log loader and a foreman until Sawyer felled a tree on him.
Yeah.
Felled a tree on his pickup.
That wasn't Activity that did that, was it?
No, it wasn't actually.
George Hart.
It was George Hart. And wasn't George the poor man up here that rolled the log off the bank and got that Sawyer, that hooker for Larry Mai? Wasn't that George Hart too?
Could have been.
How do you live with yourself after something like that?
You don't vote.
We had that one accident, pictures in my book over all the vandalism. Up at Obando, we had a knot bumper. I hate to say it, he was college educated.
That's okay.
He had gone to university and he come up, he was hired on the knot bumper, very careless. And Skelly had warned him several times. And Skelly talked, I was a shop steward, and he wanted to know what he could do about that. And I said, well, you got to give him a written verbal warning. So Skelly had given this man a written verbal warning, and about an hour later, Skelly got a call, Les Zimmerman, the safest operator we had, shovel operator, had just killed him. We had decks of logs, and up at Ovanda, we're logging them 2, 3, and 4 foot pine, and Frank Tompkins was driving truck there, and Les was loading him. He put about 3 logs on, and he'd swung over to pick up another one, and that knot bumper had walked between the counterbalance and a deck of logs. And Les didn't, he was out of sight. A no-no that you always pay attention to where you're at. You don't wait for somebody else to tell you where you should. You pay attention where you're at. This guy was walking around there, and Les had swung the shovel and the counterbalance. There's about that much room between the counterbalance and the logs, and the person doesn't fit. And so they killed him. The company got a little trouble over that because Skilly, Tompkins had stopped Les, and they got a hold of Skilly to come over there. And Skilly told Frank, had Les take the logs off the truck, put the trailer on the truck, and send them over to Donald James to get another load rather than leave them there. So you're in Ovando, the sheriff from Corner has to come from Deer Lodge. So it was about 2.5 hours before they got up there. And the company got a little bit in the ringer over that because they disturbed the scene of the accident. But Skilly got a lesson right there. Something happens, leave it, sit.
Walk away.
Wait till the officials show.
You've mentioned more than once being a shop steward in the woods. What part of that operation was unionized and to what extent?
All of the Twin Creeks operation, that was all Anaconda employees.
And those people worked
We were part of Local 3038, Bonner Union.
the logging operation for that?
Yep, for Twin Creeks.
It was.
There was 100 and, can't remember, about 110 of us loggers in the union. In fact, there was one time, one winter in the early 60s, they hired Jim Baker to haul logs. He had about 4 trucks, I think, because they needed extra trucks that winter. And all them truck drivers working for Jim Baker had to fill out a union card in order to haul. And come spring, when they laid them trucks off, one truck driver who I didn't think was really that swift, he decided, no, I'm not going back with Jim Baker. I'm a union member now, and I want to drive truck for our cook.
Yep.
For Bill Hausauer.
Bill Hausauer.
And I thought, Bill acted like he really wasn't, but he had it together. He got on without all the formality. I mean, he was an extra guy hired on, but they had to make a place for him because he was a union member now.
So that included drivers and
Drivers, loggers, sawyers.
Hookers, scalers.
Like I said, there was, at that time, probably about 120 of us, I think.
And they were just there every day.
Yeah. Because there was choker setters, sawyers, mechanics, truck mechanics, cat skinners, the truck drivers, dozer crew, everybody.
Yeah, it was $2.22 and a half an hour driving a log truck in 62 for our truck. So,
Yeah.
In 67, it was $3.95.
Well, I was on the negotiating committee, contract negotiating. I was running a road grader at the time, and I wanted a pay raise, and I'm on the negotiating committee. So, the company in negotiations, there was only 2 road graders in camp. They offered, me being on the committee, they offered me a 5 cent an hour raise. Each road grader get a nickel an hour raise. Or the other option that the company offered, they would give the truck drivers 10 cents an hour. And God, I sure want that nickel. What? There's 18 truck drivers. I turned down the Nichols so the truck drivers could all get that extra money.
Yeah, right. I want to tell you a story about the fantail. You covered a little bit, or Dennis did, when that cat wouldn't go down the hill anymore. He didn't have enough tree lengths tied on. They always estimated their loads by the steepness, and the more tree lengths they could put on to pull down, the slower they could go down the hill, see? The fantail would spread it out and keep it there, and that's how they come off the steep banks with the tree lengths.
Cables would hook to something with a winch to bring them back if it got too far.
Well, that's happened, but a lot of the times they would just go. They'd tie on more trees to inch down the steep, get down to the road and then unhook half the trees because they couldn't pull them any further, but they used it as a brake coming down the, is that right?
Yep. You get to the bottom of the hill.
So it moved a lot more.
Yeah, coming downhill, we skid a lot of tree length.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you could hook on 15 trees, get to the bottom of the hill and go to the landing. You couldn't pull 15 trees. You could only pull maybe 8. So you'd have to split your drag, unhook a bunch of chokers, go to the landing, dump your logs, and come back, get the rest of your...
But that's what the fantail really excelled.
Really helped.
There, because you could just throw on whatever you...
Until they went to arches. They had the integral arches mounted on the back of the cats.
And they were more than they
The
were.
fair lead would be about this high off the ground. And so when they tied on all these logs, they would pull them up, and that one end of the log is off the ground. And you could skid a lot more logs.
But you couldn't go down a steep hill.
No. You had to be good with the winch. When you got down steep, you would drop the logs, run to the bottom of the steep, make your turn, and then suck your logs down to you.
Kim?
Tell us a little bit about Don Skilly.
I just worked for Skilly, and a wonderful man. A very knowledgeable man. He wouldn't push you, he'd challenge you. You can do it. If you can't, ask me, I'll show you. That's how he taught us, that's how he trained us, and that's why we produced for him. Dennis can tell you more. I think he associates with the family more than I do, but I do know him, and he was a wonderful boss, him and Harold Schmidt.
Well, when I went up in the woods, when I started, my first day going to the woods, I went to camp and I come back here to the Y. Skelly was logging in Dirty Ike. I was choker setter, so meet down here, and then Skelly lines you out, and he wanted to know how experienced you were, and so he put me on a D6, setting chokers on a D6 up there. Then later I had to set chokers for Huey Evans, and Huey scared the hell out of me. But Skilly was a good boss. He didn't have as many lost logs as some of the other crews. Skilly, during the day, he would go out and walk the block where you're skidding. Because you'd have 4 cats, and he'd lay out, you're skidding from here to here, and you're from here to here, and he would walk the blocks and see if you missed any logs. And then he would tell you, you go up there, I got a red ribbon tied someplace, go get those lost logs. And eventually, after Dick Black left, they made Skilly, under Anaconda, Skilly was a logging boss, Al Dawson was a logging superintendent, and then Len Bow was assistant superintendent, and then Len quit and went out to Washington to work, and so they made Dick Black, who had been working in the sawmill going to the university. He's a tail sawyer on nights in the sawmill. He'd come up to the woods, and they made him assistant superintendent. And then when Anaconda sold out, Al Dawson went to Anaconda to manage that little 40,000 acres of land that Anaconda held over by Anaconda. They managed that till he retired, and then Dick Black became the superintendent. Now when Ernie Cork moved Dick Black to Michigan, Skilly became the logging superintendent until he retired. And then Bill Dahlman was the last logging superintendent they had. Skilly was a good man to work for. Our last day, I have a few pictures of his retirement there. Jimmy Treichel and I were shop stewards in the woods. And our last day, we thought about it, and we each gave Skilly a grievance, being shop stewards. We each gave him a grievance to end his career with. And we met with him at the end of the grievance and said, have a happy retirement. Grievance is settled.
Skilly started out at the bottom too.
Yeah, he
Worked there, he was scaling in the woods.
and he told us he'd worked in the kitchen with old Rudy when he was a young kid. And then he went scaling. He showed us some pictures of him scaling up at Placid Lake that he had at Camp 7, I think, Placid Lake.
Yeah, he worked in the kitchen at Camp 5.
So, and like I say, he's 90 today, and if we can get some people together, he's willing. He doesn't want to part with his information. He has a lot of pictures and a lot of stuff that he's willing for us to come up and copy what we want and pass it on.
He's made that invitation.
You said you had a big herd of trucks, what I'm gathering. You ever had a truck guy work for you by the name of Elmer?
Yes, I have. I've had Elmer and his boy too.
Didn't he drive for a while and then,
Wellsville for me.
then he ended up in a logging accident?
Elmer or Wells?
Elmer.
I don't know how
I
Elmer
don't
died.
recall Elmer having an accident.
I don't remember.
He died of cancer. He had to quit driving truck.
Yes, he did. But, Wells did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, Wells go for me.
And while I got you up there, what is the least log that you ever hauled on a road?
4.
4. What is the most?
350?
We got 3 out of Lincoln once.
And you call that a load?
A load nowadays is defined by the state by legal weight, by legal height and length. We try to average 27.5 ton per load. We don't measure it by diameter anymore. The pulp mill will take every stick we can get on.
I see some logger trucks that go out to the pulp mill, and there must be 500-600 on them.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it's great stuff.
And then another thing, up the Blackfoot there, at the time they took the railroad out, everybody right there that did they log up the Blackfoot there on the far side of the river, that they took and made the truck with a 9-foot, 10-foot pumps on there? Did I hear that right?
Not up the block, but at Fish Creek, Heelan, at his logging camp.
Heelan camp.
Heelan's camp had 9 and 10-foot bunks on his trucks hauling out of Fish Creek. They had a railroad landing at Fish Creek.
On the road to Hole in the Wall.
Yeah.
If you go in there and start up the Hole in the Wall, that,
But it never happened up this way.
not that I know.
No,
It didn't.
I have a picture, I haven't found it lately, one of Art Cook's old K11 International single axle, and the picture of it, and it would never clear the wires.
No.
It says 11,820 feet on that one truck, single axle International.
That's possible.
Yeah.
And there's a person.
So they wouldn't go downhill.
There's a family, an old family, homesteaded in Ovando, and the lady paints pictures, and I have a copy of it, but I forgot to bring it today, of horse logging on Montour Flats or Kleinschmidt Flats. I keep forgetting to bring that, but I'll try to share that with you. The lady painted it. I think she's blind mostly, but she painted it, I don't know how long ago, but I dug that one out.
My dad logged with horses up in the Patty Canyon area.
Bring some pictures.
I have very few.
Wow.
And then Lola Creek too.
Yeah.
Who was your dad?
My dad was Bob Cameron,
Okay, all right.
and he also for Anaconda
Yep,
too.
yep.
We could go on for a
Yeah,
while, I'll tell you.
This is wonderful. Thanks. Great. Well, thank you all. Yes. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and Rick Swanson is going to talk a little bit about the mill warehouse.
This is going to be a lot different than what you've heard already. I worked at Anaconda, and I was working in the planer at the time, and this fella came up to me and asked me that I was supposed to go see Fritz Thibodeau at the warehouse. So I went over there, and he offered me a job in the warehouse. So I said I would take it, and my job at the time, when it was Anaconda, was to get the material ready for the house plant. And when they sold a house, they would send me a bill of materials, and I would go to the high shed, where it was called, and pick out all the material that they needed to put the house together. After the people in the house plant would build up the walls and the ceilings and the rafters and put them all together for the truck. So I would get the list and put the plywood, sheetrock, nails, and whatever hardware to go with the house, and take it over to the house plant to Cy Dusik, and he would load onto the truck and take it to where it was being delivered. And after Anaconda sold, I was out of a job, so I ended up at the Anaconda Building Materials for 3 months. And then I got a call in September, and I was asked to come back and work in the warehouse again. And Ernie Peterson and I were the only ones there for a long time. So our job then was getting the material gathered together for the plywood plant, because they were building it, and all the trucks and material that came in was taken over to the various spots that they had set aside, and we had to check that in. And you can imagine how many motors and other things that came in for that plywood plant. And we had to make sure that it was all in and marked and where it was to go. And during that time, all the material came in on trucks and UPS and parcel post and semis, and we had to unload all that and check it all in too. And then after that got going, I forgot what I was going to say here. Well, when Champion came in, I should say before Champion came in, we always took a physical inventory that took several days when it was Anaconda. When Champion came in, we got computers, and that was a lot easier. As each person came into the warehouse, we had, well, I should back up and say that we stored spare parts for all the machinery in the sawmill, which was quite a bit. 2 stories, maybe 3. And as each part was taken out, the person had to fill out a sheet or a little card about that size of what they took and put it in a box. And the person on night shift would enter those cards into the computer, which automatically decreased the inventory and also printed out an order that was mailed out to the various people that had companies that they were ordering it from. So it made it a lot easier that way. And so I made a list of some of the people that I've worked for in the warehouse, and I know some of you will recognize the names. This goes back through Anaconda days and also through the Champion. Al Pitts, Joe Brown, Rod Hohalder, Brian Roberts, Zale Bender, Sue Ginn, George Stroud, Kathy Morris, Jim Martinson, Gordon Kirkwood, Jim Dawkins, Kathy Taylor, Helen Petroff, Ernie Peterson, Sue Hogan, and Ron Anderson. Now, I might have missed a few, but I hope they forgive me. Also, I have some pictures on the table over there that I put together from the warehouse that I have taken at various times. And on the far end of the table, I talked before about the small log mill, and I thought maybe that by just saying then post cap and girt, you wouldn't have any idea what I was talking about. But all those were made at the small log mill, and that's what we sent over there on the trucks. And so, I don't know how they did it, but somehow or another they put it together down in the mines on the sides and across the top, so it wouldn't fall in on them. And they say that Butte is held up by all that timber that we send over there to them. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Yes?
I had a question about the house clean.
Yes.
So would contractors call and order up a house and you would prepare all the materials? You mentioned drywall, would you?
They sent, they would have a salesman go to the people and show them what they had. They had various different models that they had. And they would pick a house. They would send me the list. On this list, they would mark down what they wanted. And then I would get it together and put it together. Whatever goes into a house, I had to put in and gather and take it to the house plant. And they would haul it out. Anything else?
You said you worked for a few months at did you say the Anaconda's building materials?
Yes.
Where was that at?
3rd Street.
Was that UBC?
It used to be UBC.
Did the accounting company run their store at that time?
Yes, they had several. Well, to go back, they even had what they called the interstate yard, which is, all over on Alder Street. And they also had that one on 3rd Street. So, anything else?
The old, the elevator that's in the warehouse. Can you tell us any stories about that?
Stories? No, I don't have any stories about it. But I remember in Anaconda days when it was the box factory, that was the warehouse, that when you're going to use it, you had to, they had a kind of a saw hanging up above with a thing on it. You pulled the rope and it would go clang, clang, you know, and let people know that you were going to use the elevator. And then you could go up and down on it.
Did they use it to get the horses up there?
No, not horses. What we did use it once to run a forklift up. And that was a small one, but it wasn't a big one. And at the box factory days, they had those little two-wheel carts that they loaded with lumber of all kinds, And that's why they raised it up to go to the box factory to make boxes.
You know, that there is an elevator just like the one you have in the box factory. It is located at the mortuary on Spruce Street. Sometime when you get in there.
Mortuary? Sometime when I get in there, yeah.
I know, because it jumped the track.
Oh.
They called me up to fix it, and you pull on the rope, and it runs you up.
Well, when I was pulling on the rope, that was just to let the person know up above that it was coming up or down. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Well, thank you very much. Let's see. Is Rudy Miller still here? He was gonna, I don't
know, they're having a party out there in the hallway.
is he out there, Judy? No, I guess he's not. And you said you had a story you wanted to share? Sure.
I have a say it.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I get to tell a story about the big boss, Robert E. Sheridan. I worked at the mill from 60 to 65. Jim Appelt, I'm sorry. And in 64, I got to work as a machine apprentice. They had an electrician apprentice and a machine apprentice, and I got the machine apprentice. I was a tail sawyer, and Trickle was I forget Trickle's first name. He was a rig setter, a feisty guy. But anyhow, in a cold day in February, I got to work overtime on Saturday, which was great. Could buy new shoes for the kids, you know. So we get out there, and it's about 10, 15 above, and I'm working the day with Stan Wool. Stan Wool recently had Ty Jacobson's job as the superintendent of maintenance. And Ty was the superintendent then. Well, we took off, and this is in 64, and we took off like in a 51 Chevy pickup. It was a wreck. And Stan said to me, he says, you drive. He said, I got you my snooze. I said, okay. So I'm coming down this grade by the green chain, and it's slicker and snot, and I can't stop. And here comes this big black Lincoln out from behind this woodpile. That's the big boy. And Art Bush is a machinist, and he's over on his rig. He can see what's going to happen, so he stopped. He's laughing like hell. And I smacked into Robert E. Sheridan, and he gets out, walks around his car, and he doesn't say a word, and I'm as white as a sheet, and he's as red as a beet. Finally, he says, get this piece of shit out of here. And Stan Wool choked on his snooze.
Does anyone else have any stories they'd like to share?
They're coming over. That's
Kim,
great.
were you want to share the Song of Bonner that you've been collecting and adding to?
I guess I could. Do you need color?
This is really switching gears. All these guys that actually did stuff out here, I'm not one of them. I don't know anything about this. The stuff that we're hearing today is fascinating to me because it's all brand new, and all the terminology and just the way you guys talk is cool. When in the last few years, the collection of photos that Jack Demmons and the school collected back in the 70s and 80s, it grew to probably over 1,600 different photos that he put on the panels that they used to put out for Old Timers Day at Bonner. And at one point, for whatever crazy reason, I decided, we better better index these. We better go through these and find out, what they are and somehow get a list of what they are. So I did that for a while, for a few years. Every once in a while, go down to the school and do that. Anyway, the names that kept coming up and mostly names that kept coming up on all these photos just kind of started ringing a bell in my head. And at one point, I guess I didn't have anything better to do. I started jotting down these names, and what it came to was a really bad poem. And but that's good. This is a long-winded introduction to what some of you guys that were at our history forum at Bonner last month know all about. It's called The Song of Bonner. And I started out with a few verses, but what my idea is that anybody can write as badly as I wrote these first verses, and I'm imploring people to add to it. Well, I'm going to read what we've got. Like I say, we're really shifting gears here. And we've already got probably at least a dozen new verses from last month, and I'm going to include those with me, and you're going to see that it's something that anybody can do, I think. And so I'm hoping that I can use this opportunity to get more people to write more verses. For some reason, our goal was to get 86 different verses. Tie that into 1886 when the first log was milled in Bonner or something. Anyway, I wish that I had copies for you guys to read along. That's why we did it at the forum at the school, but I don't. This was a surprise to me today. So, so it starts out. It's called The Song of Bonner, and it's the song that never ends. Hopefully. Right by my mouth?
4 or 5 inches.
Too close. Gotcha. Thanks. These are. Well, you've got your Thibodeau, Cadger, Sear, and Levesque. This is the Song of Bonner. Heikala, Bergseth, Karkinen, Hamma. Here is the Song of Bonner. The Swami Club and George's Cafe, Riverside Park where the band used to play, Painting the Bee, the old Injun Shay, join in the chorus of Bonner. The Margaret Hotel, the Club Chateau, the Black Bridge and Second Red Bridge, Blue Slide in Heaven, Marco Flats Picnics, these are the lyrics of Bonner. Aiken and Beetle and Cassengay, Disbro and Urkula, Fleming and Gendro, Hill, Inman, Jones, Catalyst, Labby and Moe, Niemi, Otto, Pataya, and Ranstrom, Sechrist, Toivonen, Unger, and Violet, Wishart and Old Arnold Zog, the ABCs of Bonner. The one-armed ball player named Kelly Pine, Richie Fontaine fights tonight, log rolling contests, work-up and cutthroat, these are the games of Bonner. Ackerson, Anderson, Big Nels Abrahamson, Carlson, Dodson, Erickson, Gunderson, Hansen, Iverson, Jacobson, Johnson, Larson, Magnuson, Madsen, and Matson, Mickelson, Nilsson, Olson, and Otterson, Pearson, Peterson, Robinson, Salmonson, Sampson, Swanson, and Thompson, daughters and sons of Bonner. Wood smoke wafts on a summer night's breeze. The trail back home is coated with leaves. Roars of an ice break on rivers upstream. Tadpoles stir gladly in the frog pond. These are the seasons and songs of Bonner. Old Piltsville homes, Milltown's intrigues, Pine Grove at night when the moon shines through, Silk Stocking Row across the street from the White House. These are the heart of Bonner. Leaving the donkey house as the sun sets, cocks cringing on the boom, Pike pole in hand, peavey on shoulder, the song of the river is disturbed by the crescendo as another load of logs hits the water. This is long and getting longer. Soon he is dancing and prancing from log to log. The night upriver wind changes the tempo. It takes 2 men to keep the logs in line. In the distance, the whoosh whoosh of the debarker. Then splash as clean logs hit the water in the lower pond. Mr. Fifield keeps logs lined for east and west slips, then cocks crinkling on the boom. Pike pole in hand, peavey on shoulder, back to the donkey shack and home. We will leave that jackpot for day shift. Timberjacks sawed logs in the Blackfoot Valley and beyond, so lumberjacks at Bonner could make lumber with pride and precision. Building a strong America was part of our mission: God, family, country. Bonner, Bonner, your history not everyone knows. The Indians, the mill and Herald's Club, Hotel Margaret, buried under the snow. Many old houses sitting empty, waiting to find their fate. The one that I remember is Blue 69. The gardening and going fishing, we went many times. The mill yard now is empty, everything so still. The smell of lumber still lingers. I guess it always will. The latest edition. Oh, the Blackfoot River, playground of Milltown's youth, but giver of gray hair to their mothers. 5-year-old running naked down the street, close behind mother, his clothes in one hand, a willow switch in the other. Years pass by, its swimmers sink, with taunts of fraidy cat and a push in the drink, and the jump from the old black bridge becomes a medal of honor. Playing Huckleberry Finn on a raft made of sticks, gathered from the banks of the river, lazily floating downstream, enjoying the freedom of summer. Winter comes and the water gets hard, the flash of ice skates on a moonlit night, shouting and laughter of young and old. The welcoming bonfire on the bank calls to come in from the cold. Playing field for the hockey team, with aspirations for fame in the West, with Butte and Great Falls their major foes. They always came out as the best. Oh, for the innocence of days of yore and that wonderful Blackfoot River. That's it. Somehow or other, I'd like to get you my email or mailing address if anybody would like to add on to our Song of Bonner.
Is that on the internet right now? That part?
No, but it will be. If I've got your email, I'll send it here.
Great, thank you, kid. Well, thank you all for coming. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Well, thank you all for coming, and, oh, Judy does. Sorry.
I know that I have your names. Many of you have come to all 3 sessions. If you came in today and were visiting and forgot to sign up, please do, because I will notify you when we meet again, and I don't think anybody wants to miss out on these great gatherings. So be sure that I have your name, that I can read it, phone number, and email if you have it too, please.
The tapes for the last session, are they still available, or?
You can get the DVDs that MCAT has shown already by calling MCAT. It's in the phone book. I think it's under MCAT, Montana Community Access Television. They're $10, and you can order copies from MCAT. That's probably the easiest way to get them now, since we'll be disbanding for a few months over the summer. And this current one, I'll send out a notice when it's going to be shown, probably in a month or so, and then that too will be available, and those are $10.
Thank you, ladies, for putting this all together.
Well, and Jim. Jim Willis.